time, love? I acknowledged your wife correctly the second time. So I want you to know that for those who know Jo Ann as the voice, as the conscience maker, as the microphone, I mean, she's literally a DJ around justice, who speaks out and who represents what has been over a decade of work to promote community participation in the level of responsibility for policing and for safety and justice. And that's the Albina Ministerial Alliance's Police Accountability Committee. Whether she's standing with a microphone or if she's engaged in a city council hearing, Jo Ann has been an advocate, she's been an activist, and she's been an agitator. There should be a lot of head nods about justice is not going to be done until it's done. And I'm here for the long haul. So I'd like her to begin this conversation tonight. Many of you are familiar with the Department of Justice's investigation and findings that the Portland Police Bureau was engaging in excessive and misuse of what we all consider to be violent responses, excessive force. They found it particular to people who were either diagnosed with or were seen or believed to be struggling with mental health issues. But for people of color, for African Americans, for young men of color, we know that that also has been a trait and has been a habitual situation with the Portland Police Bureau. I'd like for Jo Ann to add to the introduction of herself, although she doesn't really lead one with most of us, but to talk at first and kind of lay the ground, set the context for a conversation about where we are, what about that investigation and the findings is important, and then we want to just kind of tease you with that, open it up. We know that if you have questions or if you need more information that she can elaborate on, we want this to be an exciting and engaged and a very organic conversation. And then after that, I will try to field your questions, and then we will go into kind of a closure and talk a little bit more about why these socials are an opportunity to spread justice, spread information, and spread MRG's commitment to being the banker, the funder of social justice in Oregon. Jo Ann, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. I know there's a lot going on this evening, and so I just want to first start off by really appreciating you deciding to be here instead of many of the other places you could be this evening. I am Jo Ann Hardesty. I serve on the steering committee of the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. The coalition came together in January of 2010 for the second time after the death of Aaron Campbell, who you may remember was shot in the back by a sharpshooter named Freshour when he was involved, when he had already been talking to a negotiator. The negotiator had convinced him to come out. They were having a very non-threatening conversation, and he ended up, not only did the sharpshooter shoot and kill him, but they released a dog, they tased him, and then they shot and killed him. And so that the AMA coalition came back together at that time because we realized that these incidents continue to happen over and over and over again. So let me tell you a story. My husband and I were riding down MLK, by Ainsworth, over by the Safeway, you know where the convenience store is right down the way. So Saturday afternoon, we're riding down the street, stopped at the convenience store to get a pop. We saw a police car pull up. One go to an African American on one side of the street, and one go to an African American on the other side of the street. Both males, both mid-30s. And so we stopped. And we looked. Within 2 minutes, there were 5 police cars, 12 police officers, fully armed as if they were headed into a war zone. I mean, they had so much stuff, we didn't even know what the stuff was that they had all over their belt and up their legs. And so we watched. We stood there and observed. Come to find out, one gentleman had asked the other one for 50 cents so that he could go to the convenience store and buy a cigarette. The police saw them exchange the coins and said it was a hand-to-hand exchange. And then the guy that gave the coins threw something on the ground. So they were pretty convinced they had a drug case going on, and so the whole unit comes out. Now I have to ask you, do you think it's appropriate to have 12 police officers stop 2 people on the street? Somebody raise their hand if you think that that seems like a pretty good use of police resources. And so that's the challenge that we have. The challenge that we have as a community is that we have a police force that even when they act egregiously, even when it's clear that their actions were inappropriate, unconstitutional, and should not be tolerated, the culture of the Portland Police Bureau is built to protect those individuals. So regardless of what they do, the culture internally is all about protecting the individuals and not holding them accountable for their behavior. And so, I want to get the date straight, because I have way too many dates floating around in my head. So on June 8th of 2011, the Albina Ministerial Alliance wrote a letter to Thomas Perez asking the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division to come to Portland to investigate the pattern and practices of behavior of Portland police officers, especially as it related to race. Because it has been our experience in this community that African Americans are stopped 2.5 times more than their numbers in the population would indicate would be appropriate. They're searched twice as often, and they're half as likely to have guns, drugs, and other paraphernalia once that activity happens. And so we asked the Department of Justice, we said, we have gone through and used all the internal mechanisms to try to hold the police accountable. I can tell you I've served on Blue Ribbon Task Force, I've served on committees, I've worked internally and externally trying to change the culture. And we decided in 2011 that clearly we were not going to be able to change the culture without the assistance of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. So let me tell you that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, they came out, they conducted an investigation. Some of the things that they found were absolutely appalling when it related to the use of force. They showed examples of people who are suffering from diabetic comas. And I'll tell you this one quick story. There was a woman in an apartment complex, heard a man screaming downstairs, and called the police and said, I think there's something going on with my neighbor, please come and check on him. This is a welfare check. Come and see if he's okay. The police came. The gentleman was in his apartment, buck naked, and he was talking, but he was talking kind of in gibberish, right? Because he was in distress. The police officer looks at him and says, sit down. And the man is just talking in gibberish. And so the police officer punches him. When the man still doesn't sit down, he tases him, right? And so they ultimately tased this man 3 times. They punched him in the face, tased him 3 times before they came to the conclusion that he was suffering from a medical emergency and ultimately took him to the hospital. Now, when we send the police to go on a welfare check, which is what happened with Aaron Campbell, Aaron Campbell was killed because his mom said, I'm worried about him. One son had died earlier that day from liver failure, and so he was distressed. And so when they sent the police to go and do the welfare check, he ultimately ended up dead as well. So the Department of Justice came out. They did a 10-month investigation. They released their findings. Their findings basically tell us that we have a police bureau that is unaccountable to the public that they serve. What they tell us is that basically Portland police have learned how to cover their own butt. I mean, to the extent where they have subordinates signing off on their supervisor's use of force. Some reports just aren't even done. And so I'm going to slide into the settlement agreement. So there was the settlement agreement negotiated behind closed doors with then Mayor Sam Adams, the city attorney, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The first day we saw the settlement agreement was the day they were presenting it to the city council. And the expectation was that the city council was just going to rubber stamp it and off it would go. Fortunately, we had a couple of people on the city council that actually wanted to ask questions, had some information they wanted to put into the settlement agreement. I will tell you that the settlement agreement requires us to spend $26 million over the next 5 years to build up a mental health unit within the Portland Police Bureau. Now, I gotta tell you, I think that's a wrong move. I think if we're gonna spend $26 million, let's put it in the mental health system so that we actually have mental health professionals going on calls for people who are in mental distress. Let's not pretend that somehow police with $26 million new dollars are gonna be able to figure out how to be compassionate caregivers. A, that's not their job, and B, they've shown that they're not the appropriate people to show up when people are in distress. And so now, there's good news. There's a couple of bright points here. One is that recently, Judge Michael Simon, who's the federal judge who's been assigned the settlement agreement. So let me tell you what happens, because so the settlement agreement, once it's been approved, it goes to the federal courts. The federal courts, it's on an inactive docket, unless there's a concern about the settlement agreement not being followed. I already had 2 minutes, not that I was speaking. Okay, thank you. So the settlement agreement gets filed with the federal court, but the AMA coalition said, well, wait a minute. We want to represent the community, because we don't believe that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and their settlement agreement really represented the community. So we want standing to be able to represent the community, and Portland Police Association, which is the union, also asked for standing because they said they weren't involved in the settlement negotiations. And so the judge has given both AMA limited standing in this agreement. They've given us enhanced friend of the court, so enhanced amicus status is what they call it. And with the Portland Police Association, they've given them standing to address the issues as it relates to their contract. And so I'm going to stop there, because if that was 2-minute warning, I'm probably done. But I will end with this. I will say, ask me lots of questions, because I have a lot more info that I couldn't share on a 10-minute blog. But what I will say is that we're beginning the process now to mediate the settlement agreement. So the 4 parties, the City of Portland, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the AMA Coalition, and the Portland Police Association will be meeting with a mediator to see if we can, as 4 entities, come to some agreement on the settlement agreement. I can tell you today that is probably unlikely that we're going to all 4 agree on what's in the settlement agreement. And so I will stop there and thank you very much for listening.